Thanks again for coming today. I'm Mike Goucher. Welcome to Eckstein Hall at Marquette University Law School. This is On the Issues. This is our series of continuing conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. And today we are delighted to be joined by the distinguished professor in education, the founder and director of the Institute for the Transformation of Learning at Marquette University. Won't you please welcome Dr. Howard Fuller.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There's something else now he has to add to his resume, author, because we're here to talk about his new book, No Struggle, No Progress, A Warrior's Life, From Black Power to Education Reform. I told Howard upstairs earlier that I think we met in 1981 when I was a reporter here in town and the Ernie Lacy case was playing out. And I thought I knew a fair amount about Howard because I've covered him on many occasions over the course of the last 2 or 3 decades. But I really didn't know Howard Fuller until I read this book. Tell me why you wrote it, why you decided to write it.
First of all, Mike, let me start out by thanking you for doing this, and equally important, thank all of you all for being here. I'm really humbled to see all of you all here, and I deeply appreciate it. I also want to take a minute to thank the folks at Marquette University Press for publishing the book. Because you know how you write a book and you hope somebody go publish it, then you hope somebody go read it. But I wrote the book really for, I think, 4 reasons. Number one, there are about 13 or 14 books out there where people talk about me or talk about my work in one way or another, and all of them come at it from wherever their particular perspective is. And so I thought, well, hey, man, maybe I should tell my own story, like in my own way. The second reason is I was hoping that young people would read the book, and that if they read it, that one of the lessons I hope they'll draw from it is that if you choose to engage in struggle over a period of time, will you be able to deal with all the contradictions? Because there's no way to do this over a long period of time and not have to face a lot of different contradictions. And for some people, those contradictions will seem to be issues of principle, whereas for me, they might be strategy and tactics. So for example, for some people, and I see a couple of them in the room, meeting with George Bush for them would be a matter of principle. For me, it's an issue of strategy and tactics. So it's all in how you approach it. The third thing is, and this particularly applies to the part of the book that talks about North Carolina, a lot of the people who were close friends of mine have passed. And I felt like it was my duty to tell their story by telling my story. And there's a section in the book, for example, where I talk about Thelma Jean Miller, TJ, as we called her. And I was with TJ on her deathbed, and I had the opportunity to read the section of the book that deals with her and to get her approval. You have to know TJ, because if it was not been right, she would have cursed me out, even though it was on her deathbed. So to get her approval was like phenomenal. And then the last reason is that it really gives me an opportunity to honor my mother and my grandmother, who are the two most important people in terms of my being here today. So I think that, those are probably the main 4 reasons why I wrote the book.
Well, let's walk through your life in 35 minutes. And let's talk about your grandma and your mother. Yeah. Your life begins in Shreveport, Louisiana. Interesting time in our nation's history. But your grandmother, I think you said in the book, taught you not to fear people with power.
Yeah, there were two incidents that I talk about in the book. The one that you got to know Pearl. That's my grandmother, right? So my mother and I were sitting on the steps at our house, at the back of the house, and a cop came in and said that a robber was in our house. And my mother said, "Well, there's nobody in our house." And the cop said, "Yes, there is." And she said, "No." So the cop kicked her. And so they called Pearl. My grandmother came home. This is in the 40s. My grandmother came home, got her gun, and went to the police station with a gun. So there's that story. And then our houses back then were built so that it was up from the ground, and so you could run up under there and play, you know what I mean? So when the police come by, we used to run up under there. And my grandmother saw me run up under there one day, and I know this is now child abuse, but my grandmother, so I have to apologize, but my grandmother was the kind of person who would get the switch, but you had to go get it. And it couldn't be one of those that would break up. It had to be one, the green ones that would, make a noise, that. So she saw me run up under the porch, and she gave me a whipping. And the thing was, she told me, don't you ever let me see you run from a white person or a policeman or anybody else when you have done nothing. And you are not to be afraid of people who are, quote, in power.
You said that your grandmother was the matriarch of a small family of missing men.
Yeah.
Your dad was not really present in your life.
No, I met my father when I was 30-some years old. The dude came up to me. I had just given us, I'm sorry about that. I apologize. Okay. I was Debbie was like, oh my God. No, I mean, he came up to me. I had just given a speech in California and told me, he was my father. And to be honest with you, it had no impact on my life. And for those who read the book, you'll know that there's a part where I talk about one of my sons, Van, and what happened there. But yes, but I don't really ever recall missing my father. I mean, I just don't. I mean, I had a stepfather who I hated because he beat
the way he treated your mother.
Because he beat my mother. And I confronted him when I was 16. Because back then that was like grown folks' business, and you didn't interfere in grown folks' business. But I thought I was grown at 16, and so that was the first kind of almost physical thing that happened between us about him beating my mother.
So your mother, your grandmother stressed education.
Yes.
And at the age of 5, you moved to Milwaukee. And you go to a Catholic school, St. Boniface.
Yes.
Good education there? Did you immediately take to school? Did you love school?
Yeah, but I was talking all the time, man.
That's impossible to believe.
And so, the nuns used to hit me with the ruler, you know what I mean? And
my wife has those stories too. Yeah.
I see Bob laughing, but the big, because I was talking all the time, and then one time I discovered, and you all can appreciate this, I saw the hair come out from underneath the nun's thing, and you weren't supposed to see that, and you certainly weren't supposed to announce it, but of course I saw it and I announced it to her. So, and then, 12th Street School used to be over there, and we were told not to go over there and play baseball against them, right? But of course, we went over there, we played baseball. So then the nuns made us do these arithmetic cards. You'd have to stay after school and do this long division and long multiplication, all that. And then you had to go home and copy, like, pages of a book. And so I didn't do it, right? And so I came I came back to school, and they sent me home. And it was a day, it was raining, like, and my mother used to beat me with whipping you, but with an ironing cord. And so I had hid the ironing cord in a old umbrella that was in a closet that we never went to. So, because, I was, and so my mother was looking for the ironing cord, mad, couldn't find it, beat me with a belt for getting sent home from school, but it was raining that day. So she went into this closet and found the old umbrella, which I thought nobody would ever use. And so then she gave me a whipping with the ironing cord for hiding the ironing cord. But anyway, so they were about to put me out of St. Boniface, so I went to Lincoln, which was a mistake, but everybody makes mistakes in their life. But I went to Lincoln in 8th grade.
North Division High School.
Yeah.
You were a very good student and a very good basketball player. Am I stating that accurately?
You are. If it wasn't true, you would be bragging. But since it is factually correct, we cannot we cannot say that that's bragging.
So you guys won a lot of basketball games in North Division.
we
Did you
did.
not win a state title?
No, we lost 62-59. Not that I'm remembering. Plus, we got cheated. But no, I played on the first team for Milwaukee to ever go to the state tournament. Our junior year, we went up and we won the Constellation Championship. My senior year, as some people, I know Yvonne is a cheerleader, so she remembers, but my senior year, we lost to Madison East with Pat Richter, 62-59. We did get cheated, though. Seriously. I mean, I'm just saying. And for all of my, I forgot to mention, all of my tweeters in here, please tweet out. And follow me on Howard L. Fuller. I'm shamelessly asking you to follow me.
You were such a good basketball player and such a good student. You get a scholarship to go to Carroll College.
Yeah.
You were the only black person at Carroll College when you went there.
Yeah, my mama dropped me off there. I was 17, man. She left me out there. There weren't even any black people working out there. But I took a Trailblazer scholarship, and what it was that you had to get a higher grade point average each semester in order to keep it. And the reason for that is because I had torn ligaments in my ankle my senior year, and Marquette had recruited me late in New Mexico and Indiana. But I was worried that if I went to a big school and I got hurt, I would lose my scholarship. And plus, Mr. Scott, Wesley Scott, who was the head of the Urban League then, there was an effort to try to integrate the colleges in the state of Wisconsin. And many of y'all know this, but Jarrell Al went to Ripon, and I went to Carroll. And so that's how that occurred.
Well, in this book, you talk about your experiences at Carroll, and on the surface, Howard, I think they seem very positive. You made some great friends. You said you created some great memories. You were student body president. You were very successful on the basketball team. And yet you write in here, I would never ask another young person to go what I went through. Why do you say that?
Never, man. Because I was in between two worlds, Mike. I'm out there at Carroll, right? People don't understand, say they don't know what I'm saying, and why you got a mustache and, stuff like that. And so I'm trying to figure out how to negotiate that. And then the few times I would get on the bus and come home, then I get home and my friends would be like, man, what's wrong with you? And I didn't know the latest dances, and then they wouldn't dance with me. I mean, plus you black. And so, dating and stuff, that was like, you're not trying to do that. And so it was, but on the other hand, I made such great friends, that I talk about in the book, like Doug and Judy, Doug, my roommate, Bill and Carla Mullen, people who are my friends today, right? I got a great education, but I lost my sense of myself. And so when I got ready to go to graduate school, my thing was the school's either got to have some black people in it or the city. And so I chose Cleveland and Western Reserve University because of community organization, but also because there were black people in the city.
You talk in the book about reconnecting with your roots and about becoming more active in the civil rights movement.
Right.
And you said for you there was sort of, I would call it as almost a seminal moment. You mentioned it in here, April 3rd, 1964, you go to see Malcolm X in Cleveland.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to what you saw and heard that night?
Like a lot of black people, I was afraid of Malcolm X, man, because the stuff that people was pumping out on TV, and I was like, oh my God. So I went to see him twice, early in the afternoon when all the middle class black people and white people were out there, because that's who can go to meetings in the middle of the afternoon, right? So it was a debate with Louis Lomax. Mm-hmm. And at that meeting, people were with Louis Lomax. But that night at Corey Methodist Church, man, that church was packed with working class black people. And it was clear, man, after about a minute, like who they were with. And I was sitting up in the balcony listening to Malcolm. I had never heard anything like that in my life. And it changed my whole life. It changed my view about myself as a black person and as a black man. Because Malcolm was bringing it, man. and you couldn't leave there and be the same. At least I did not leave there, because I had been demonstrating it, because I had joined CORE. And in fact, I talk about in the book, the first time I got arrested was for sitting in all night at the school board. And they beat us and all of that. And then I was also participating in the demonstration over at the site. We were demonstrating, interesting, I've given my history, we were demonstrating to keep a school from being built in the black community, Glenville. And I was in the demonstration the day that Bruce Clunder was killed. I know Bob knows about this. Some people have seen it. There's an actual photograph of him laying there, because we were laying out in front of tractors to keep them from building the site. And normally what they would do would be to take the scoop and they would dump dirt on us. But this particular moment, the guy started the tractor and went backwards and crushed Bruce Clunder. If he'd have started and gone forward, he would have crushed me. So that was the beginning of my sort of activism, I would say.
So you go to North Carolina after getting your master's degree, community organizer down there. I think you said in this book you became one of the most hated black men in North Carolina, at least in the eyes of some white people with power. Why were you a hated figure?
Yeah, I've had that happen a few times in my life, including Milwaukee. What happened was that I started out by just knocking on doors, right, and asking people, like, what's going on in the community, what kinds of things are you all interested in, and we would try to organize around that, right? And I had read the Economic Opportunity Act, and there was that little phrase in there that says that you need to have maximum feasible involvement of the poor. I thought what that meant was that we actually were going to try to win the war. See, I went down there thinking that if you're going to fight a war on poverty, that you actually wanted to win the war. And so, and that it was going to be important that the people who were going to be liberated, they had to be a critical part of their own liberation, which I believe today. So when I was knocking on doors, I came up with this idea that you couldn't fight a war on poverty, and one of the biggest slumlords in the city was on the board, because how are you going to have the enemy planning the war? So I thought we needed to get him off the board, and that the way to do it was to demonstrate and stuff like that. But then what I also realized is that in order to get people's houses fixed, we needed to go on rent strikes. And so I was involved with organizing rent strikes. And then in the housing project, the kind of organizing that we did led to something that I don't know that people even know that this occurred because of my work back then. But we formed a Mothers Club in the housing project. We named it the Mothers Club because I thought, hey, who's going to be against mothers? So the Housing Authority. So they tried to evict Joyce Slaups, who was the head of the Mothers Club, and she got that was all in this thing. But anyway, we ultimately went all the way up to the Supreme Court to establish the principle you couldn't evict people out of the housing project without giving them a reason. That started with the organizing work that I did in McDougal Terrace Housing Project. But a part of the reason I really became hated was this was during the period of Black Power. If you remember, Stokely this was after Meredith was shot, and they were having demonstrations going from city to city, and a guy named Willie Ricks shouted out Black Power. And people think Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael came up with it. It wasn't, it was Willie Ricks. And Stokely picked it up and began to talk about Black Power. Well, that made sense to me because I was black, the people I was working with was black, and they didn't have no power. So it seemed to me that that was a logical thing, Black Power. So I began, grew an afro, and, because that was back during the time when we were really struggling to get black people not to be negative about themselves because they were black. And, I used to talk about how, we got lips, big lips and kinky hair, and it's cool, because back then it was viewed as, oh my God, you got to get your hair straightened, you got to get Natanola, try to get as light as you could be. So the whole Black Power thing was in part like, see, Myra knows about Natanola. You can always tell who know what when I say something, right? Because I get a witness. Okay, but anyway. So I began to organize not just in Durham, but all over the state. And I think the point that people got focused on me was, we had a big meeting up in Bertie County, and we were in this armory, and it was an organization called People's Program on Poverty or something like that. And so they invited me to speak, right? There was like 1,000 black people in this armory, right? So I get up in there, and I'm waiting to speak, and the white dude who was the head of the thing gave the speech before me. He was the head of the Community Action Program, not PPOP. So this dude gets up, he throws a handkerchief up in the air, and he tells the black people, like, when I throw this handkerchief up in the air, y'all should cheer. And then when he hit my hand, y'all should stop cheering. First, I'm sitting there, so I know we ain't gonna do this. And then I'm saying to myself, I know these folks they're not gonna do this. So he threw it up, and they was, came on and stopped. He did it again, then he faked it, and they cheered. I told you not to cheer unless I threw it up. I'm the next speaker. So I got up there, and I just told these black people, I just can't believe y'all just did this. And then I made the mistake of trying to come up with an analogy, as I do a lot, and I came up with not a good analogy. I told two stories that got me in trouble. One is, I said the whole time that I was coming up here, all I saw was black people down in ditches digging and white people standing up over them looking. And then what I want to do is I want black people to get some looking jobs. That instead of us having the digging jobs. And then I went overboard and said that this is a fight. And the fight is like black people come to the fight with switches and white people got bats. I said, we need to get some bats. The headlines in every paper in North Carolina is full of says black people need to pick up bats and start, baseball bats, fighting. So, there were issues with me, and the kind of organizing I was doing, and, we were the first ones to take people to register them to vote using government officials' vehicles. That led in part to the Hatch Act, that people can't participate in electoral politics when they're working the government. I was a part of getting that law passed. So it was a few things like that.
One thing you did in North Carolina, and as you said, you were more into the Black Power movement at that time. You had been involved in some work at Duke University in Durham, where students were trying to get a Black Studies program, and they were frustrated. And I think at that point in your life, and we're talking the late 60s here, you decided, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to create our own university, Malcolm X Liberation University.
Yeah.
You're the founder. What were you thinking at that time?
Well, what happened is that the black students from Duke, one of the black students, Chuck Hopkins, had been an intern, because during the summer I had created an intern program, and I had trained people young college students to be organizers, and I placed them in 11 counties throughout North Carolina. And one of them was Chuck Hopkins, and so he went to Duke. So when he came back, he was like, hey, the education we're getting here, it doesn't correspond with what we saw during the summer. And they began to demand an Afro-American Studies program. And when the university was not moving fast enough, the students took over the administration building, Allen Building, and they renamed it the Malcolm X Building. And so I was actually speaking at Bennett, and I was on my way to Atlanta to speak at Spelman, and I got word that the students had taken over the building. So I rushed back from Greensboro. They let me in the building, and so early on, the students were militant, and we had all these meetings, where they were talking about the issues. Then as it started to get dark, some of them started saying, my mama didn't send me to Duke to get arrested and all this. So I had to figure out a way for them to get out of the building, but in a militant way. And, so I did, and we went out the back like this. The problem was
nobody saw it.
The cops didn't know we had left. So they broke out the windows, tear gassed the building, got in there mad as hell that we were gone. So they tear gassed all these white students who were just standing around out there, turned them into militants, and we marched on the president's house, right? So that was an interesting experience. But back then they gave black students like a room. So they had the black room, which was up on the 4th floor of the Union. So we went to the black room, and while we was up there, we started talking about trying to create a black university, independent black university. And so we agreed we were going to create Malcolm X. And initially, it was just going to be black history, black English, black this, black that. And so everything that was white was just going to be black. And no, seriously, that was the level we were operating at. So my job was to go out and raise the money to try to create this university. And at the time, I was still working in the poverty program, and Sergeant Schreiber, who was the head of the Office of Economic Opportunity at the time, said they would never give that grant as long as I continued to work. So I resigned so that the community group that could form this economic development project would still exist. And I started working full-time to form Malcolm X Liberation University. So we went from being just a Saturday school, like we started, to becoming a full-time school. And we got the money from the General Convention of Special Programs of the Episcopal Church, which caused a huge uproar in the Episcopal Church that this money was coming to create Malcolm X Liberation University. So that's another story, but that's how it happened.
When you look back at the university, which is, I think, and you write in the book, had financial problems, a lot of issues right from the get-go, really. For 4 or 5 years in existence. Was that a success? Was it a failure? How do you view that?
It was a success to the extent that not only did we set up Malcolm X, but the Marcus Garvey Institute was set up in Youngstown. People in Milwaukee may not remember, but the Clifford McKissick, because after he was killed by the police, there was the Pan-African Work Center in Atlanta, Georgia. We formed this coalition of independent schools. But what the Malcolm X Liberation University did, though, was to establish the fact for me that A, you could create institutions, B, you could define yourself. You don't always have to be defined by other people, and that you could bring people together and, in very difficult circumstances, create something that will benefit. Like, we just had the launch of my book in D.C. last week. The beautiful thing about it, Mike, as it pertains to Malcolm X, is there was a woman who came. Her name is Abiye. Her name is Michelle Wilson, but her African name is Abiye. Abiye was 17 years old when I met her. She defied her mother to come to learn to become a revolutionary at Malcolm X Liberation University. The beautiful thing was that she was there, for the launch of my book, and so was Amanda Page. Amanda Page is a first-year student at Howard University, graduate of Milwaukee Collegiate Academy. Mm-hmm. And to have both of them there was, for me, powerful. Because forming Malcolm X was, it was very difficult, and I talk about it in the book in terms of all of the kinds of issues and stuff that we ran into. But I would define it as a success in the period of history in which it operated.
We're going to go to Milwaukee here in a second, but one final question on this. At this moment in your life, you became very involved in this discussion about Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
And you decided you were going to go to Africa.
Yeah.
And I'll say you hung out with freedom fighters in Mozambique, which resulted in Portuguese Army helicopters firing at you.
Yeah.
How long were you there? Why did you do that? What did you learn from that experience?
I talk about that in the book too. But some of you all from Milwaukee remember Reverend Lucius Walker. Lucius died maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but he was instrumental in the formation of Northcott. But so Lou went to New York and was the head of a group called the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization. And back then, South Africa had a program where they would try to get African Americans to come to South Africa to prove that apartheid wasn't so bad. And so they would get, I think Muhammad Ali actually went. I'm trying to remember different people who went. They went after sports people and all of that. But Lou got an invitation to come. And so I led a revolt on the board that not only are you not going, but we're going to set up a liberation fund to support the liberation struggles in southern Africa. So those were, at that time, it was the struggles in Mozambique, Angola, and then in West Africa, Guinea, and also at that time, obviously South Africa and what was then Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. So we ended up having a press conference at the United Nations to announce the formation of this fund to support the liberation movements. And so they were having a conference in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and they invited me over there to give a speech on black education. But when I got there, because people knew about this fund, I met with the heads of all of the liberation movements in Southern Africa. And for LIMO, the Front for Liberation of Mozambique, they invited me to come into the liberated territories because you just go across the Ruvuma River from Tanzania and you're in Mozambique. And so, so I was like, yeah, but they said you can't tell anybody that you're going. And so I was with this group of people, and all of a sudden, I dropped off of the face of the earth. Nobody knew what happened to me. And so I was only supposed to be in there 2 weeks, but we got attacked by the Portuguese while I was in there. So one Saturday while I was down at the river, washing my face, Cornelio, who was my interpreter, because they kept an interpreter with me, all the time, because all the different languages that were spoken. So Cornelio spoke English. So I had gotten used to motors. The airplanes, we would march from sunup to sundown, right? Just so you all know, in elephant grass. And the idea was to hide us from the airplanes, because the Portuguese were always coming over. So I was used to the airplane motors. But this day I heard some motors that I had never heard before. It was helicopters. And they had found the base that we were at. So they came in low with machine gun fire. And so Cornelius started hollering at me, "Owusu, Owusu, we got to go." And so as we were running, it was like the movies, except it was real, where you go tat, 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 tat. And so we were running, and we were trying to get to a banana plantation. We ended up crawling into a banana plantation. And the way that the Portuguese did this was they would come in with helicopters to try to pin you down, and then the bombers would come in, and then they would land to encircle you. And so when we were in this banana plantation, I was looking up, and you could see the helicopters. They had anywhere from 8 to 10 soldiers in them, and they were trying to figure out where to land. And I could actually see them with all the weapons, but they couldn't see us. I hugged that banana tree so hard that I became a banana tree. And so we actually ended up breaking through the encirclement and then going up into the mountains. And it was interesting because it was the time when Attica happened. And so over Radio South Africa, first of all, they announced that the Portuguese had found us and had killed all of us. So it was interesting to hear the announcement about your death. And but also they were talking about Attica, and it sounded like there was a revolution in America, the way that they were explaining it. So that's what happened. So instead of being in there 2 weeks, I ended up being in there 30 days because once we got out, it took 2 weeks to walk out, after the attack.
Spending that time over there, in many respects, is an incredible education, probably frightening, exhilarating, all of those things. But you came back here, and I'm going to get you to Milwaukee here. You came back to the States, and you dabbled in union organizing. You said you believed that Marxism might be able to topple capitalism. But at some point, you grew disillusioned, and your family life wasn't what you wanted it to be. You said you reached the point where you were a broken man when you came back to Milwaukee. How were you broken?
The way that I am is that if I really believe in something, I believe in it deeply. And then when you realize that something that you really believed in was not what you thought it was, it has an impact. And what was happening to me is I was going through ideological transformations and difficulties, and I was also going through a divorce. And I had 3 kids. And I had severe back trouble. And I had gone through, Bob knows about some of this, but I'd gone through a level of insanity that at best could be called left-wing adventurism. I got some other names for it. And so one day, I just decided to put everything I could into my car and drive back to Milwaukee. And when I came to Milwaukee, I had no job. I could barely walk, but I had to take care of my children, was the thing that was most paramount on my mind. Ira Grant gave me the opportunity to sell insurance.
You sold
for
insurance,
Equitable
that's right.
Life insurance. And I sold insurance for 11 months. And
You said you were good.
Yeah, I was. And again, it's not bragging, it's all factual. And there's a funny story here. You know, like I sold more insurance than anybody else who came in with me in the region. And the way that insurance companies keep you selling stuff is, you know, they give you trinkets and stuff. And then they had they had this thing up in Cable, you know, where they brought all of the high rollers to a weekend in a resort. And they asked me to speak.
Share your secrets.
Yeah, like on how you sold all this insurance. And so I had already decided to quit. And now this is a funny story. So, and one of the things is, and Bob Lowe knows this, and Sandy, because Mitch had, you know, Arnold Mitchum had the Educational Opportunity Program, and so I had been interviewed and to become the head of the college special services, but the college division for EOP, and I had accepted the job. So when I got up to Cable, I decided to give a speech on why insurance companies should divest from South Africa. So I got up and gave these people out there like, what did they get this person? You know, and my manager, he was like, oh my God. And so as I walked off the stage, I said, I quit now. You know, before he had an opportunity to fire me. So anyway.
So the insurance career ends, and and you go to work at Marquette, which you write of very fondly in here, Dr. Arnold Mitchum and your experience there. But you decided at some point you sort of returned to activism, and I mentioned there was, for those of you in the room who are old enough to know this, there was of course the battle to save North Division as a neighborhood school. But I want to talk a little bit about the Ernie Lacy case that I mentioned earlier. That's where you and I met. You know, when you see things in Ferguson today and you think about some of the issues that are still present in the world today, you look back on the Ernie Lacy case, which is about the death of a young black man in police custody for a crime he did not commit. When you look back at that, you think you did well in terms of handling that the movement did well in terms of gaining some achievements in that.
Yeah, you know, Reverend Ivy can really appreciate this, but this, for me, goes all the way back to Daniel Bell in 1958, when Reverend Lathan, you know, led the struggle because of this black man who was killed. And ironically, as some of you all remember, it was during the Lacy event that the conscience struck this cop, and they came forward and admitted that they had planted, it was either a knife or a knife on Daniel Bell. But the Lacy case, and I'm looking at Curtis, because Curtis is now leading a righteous struggle against the police for shooting this man 13 times down there at Red Arrow Park. And he's one of the Fuller Torch fellows. So here I am, like, this was 1981, this is like 2014. You know what I'm saying? And so, but what we did for the first time was, this was, as you all remember, it's Decker, Cult, and all of those. Nothing had ever been done to a police officer for killing a black person in Milwaukee ever. And so the Lacy struggle, we ended up under the lead, it was being co-led by Michael McGee Sr. and myself, and we created the Coalition for Justice for Ernest Lacy. And first there was the inquest panel, and I'll talk about that. And then ultimately, we sat in McCann's office. Spencer can remember, because Spencer also was important to the laws being changed to give the Fire and Police Commission I think this is right, Spencer, the ability to hire and fire because the police chief, because Breyer was police chief for life. And so the establishment of the Fire and Police Commission, some of the authority came, Curtis, out of the Lacey battle. But what we did was we did not get criminal charges, but we did end up with one of them getting fired, which had never happened before. There was also a civil suit that the Lacey family was able to win from the city. One of the funniest things that happened during this is that we decided to sit in all night at McCann's office. But I didn't want it to be the kind of normal sit-in, you know, everybody was sitting in there disciplined and stuff. So what we did was we played bid whist. We brought in some hot plates. We was cooking chicken and greens, and his office was smelling with collard greens and chicken. And no, we actually did this. I know y'all think I'm lying, but we actually did this. And so we had sat in all night, and we were having like weekly rallies at Incarnation Lutheran Church and on Sundays. And so we had sat in for 3 days, and so it was time to go to the rally. So Mike and I decided that we were going to force them to arrest us, and then there was going to be free Mike and Howard, you know, thing.
Mike McGee.
Yeah, Mike McGee. So we told everybody to go to the rally, and then we sat there waiting for them to arrest us, right? Because we was going to be in jail, and then we was going to be martyrs and stuff. So the police came and told us to move. Mike and I, we're not moving. So they picked us up, and you know, me and Mike said, "We on the way to jail. We on the way to jail." They took us downstairs, opened the door, and threw us outside. You're like, okay, you think we're gonna arrest you? No, we're not arresting you, man.
So after Lacey, you're involved in getting more involved in education issues. You're beginning to have even more interest in that subject, but also. You're realizing that you need to be in the room in politics, and so this is a change for you. You've decided, hey, I really to accomplish the things that I want to get done. I've got to be there at the table. How long did it take you to come to that realization?
You know what? A couple big things happened. Me looking out the window on 4th floor at Marquette Hall, Sandy. One of them was one day I was looking out the window, and I decided to get my doctorate, which is also a funny story, because I got the lowest GRE that's ever been recorded at Marquette University. This is a true story. I'm not lying about that. I've been like 50, I was taking classes, and so I was getting A's. So I said, GRE, I don't need to study for that. I haven't been in school in 15 years. And the only way I got into PhD program was Dr. Green was leaving to go to MSOE or somewhere, and the vote was 2-1. And he told me he voted for me because, hell, he was leaving. He didn't care. So, but anyway, so that was one of the things. So, but the other thing, looking out the window up there one day, I decided I was going to get involved in the governor's race. I didn't know anybody. I knew Wood couldn't win. I knew that Schreiber had all of the old line black people support. So I decided I was going to support Tony Earl. Had never met him in my life. And so decided to have a fundraiser for him at my house. And I had, along with Martha Love and all of them, had formed a group, Danae, and I'll call the Black Political Network. Jeanette knows about that. And so I invited Tony to come to my house, said, hey, you know, we're going to support you. And normally what black people would do is they would ask white people for money to support them in the election. My thing was, no, we're not going to ask for any money. We're not going to ask for no chicken dinners and nothing on election day. In fact, we're going to give you money. And what we're going to do is we're going to organize certain wards. Ralph Holman was really engaged in this. And so what ended up happening is Tony won the primary. And in the wards that we worked, he lost by less. Because Schreiber had a total political base in the city of Milwaukee. So when Tony B. Kohler, I think, for governor, he came to my house, interesting because Walter Farrell was running his mouth as usual, about, Tony Earl was going to ignore black people. And at the time he was running his mouth, Tony was at my house. And so what we did was we got an agreement. I would get a secretary's position. And at first I thought it was Dillard, but it ended up being DER, Department of Employment Relations. Denae would become his legal advisor. And then ultimately Ralph Holman came up to run the minority small business part of DOA. And then the other thing that we got was a number of appointments on boards and commissions. And so that was how I became the secretary of DER. It was interesting because, as some of you all know, like I had to go through confirmation. And a person from the John Birch Society had found, I had been involved in an economic development conference in Detroit. I think I talk about this in the book. And James Foreman came in at the plenary session, people with guns, like we're all sitting here, and they surrounded the wall and said, we're taking over this meeting in the name of the people, and demanded reparations. And they decided they were going to disrupt church services throughout America. And the first one, they actually disrupted the church service at Riverside Church in New York. But anyway, the part of it that had to do with me was he formed a committee, and I was on it. We didn't ever have a meeting, but I was on it. And so this person from the John Birch Society sent this to every elected official in the state of Wisconsin, saying, this is the kind of person you're about to put in our state government. They also did it for the county. So anyway, I got confirmed and all of that. And I learned very quickly, and I say this to anybody, don't go do a job unless you intend to do the job. If you're not going to do the job, don't take it. But once you take it, you got to be willing to do what it takes to be successful in the job. And one of the things about my people that I love is that black people are schizophrenic in this sense. We want people to get in leadership roles, but as soon as you do, that ends soul out. You know, so you can't have it both ways. I mean, do you want us to be up there or not? And if you get in there, there's things you got to do that you don't do if you're not in it. You know, but so it's a long story. Anyway, so yeah, I learned a lot, about state government. I learned how it worked, which has helped me immensely. I am totally indebted forever to Tony Earl, who was the finest person that I've ever worked for. Tony was just a phenomenal person.
You had a number of experiences in the 80s into the early 90s. You worked for Tony Earl. You were a dean at MATC. You worked for Dave Schultz, the late county executive, Secretary of Health and Human Services, which you have described as the most depressing job you've ever held. People can read the book, and I think you'll understand why he says that. It's not anything to do with Dave Schultz. It's to do with what you see in that job. But Howard, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about MPS and then a little bit about your work today. MPS, that was not really going to be your job. It was going to be your wife's job. She wasn't yet to be your wife, but Deborah McGriff was the deputy superintendent.
No, we weren't even an item.
I know, you weren't an item.
We were not an item. In some people's minds, because of how y'all think. Yeah, I know.
So anyhow, Deborah was the deputy. And it became clear, according to the book, and Deborah can vouch for this, I guess, and see if Howard's telling the truth on this, it became clear that the board was not going to give the job to you, and so you ended up applying, you got hired, and you said at the first, there were a couple of tip-offs that this might not go exactly the way you wanted. You were invited to meet with the board, and at the very first meeting with the board, you were never allowed to speak.
Yeah, that was
Jeanette
and Joyce and them. That's true. Let me just say this very clearly. When Bob Peterkin decided to go back to Harvard, Deborah McGriff called me and said, "Can we have breakfast?" And we had breakfast at Le Peep on Wisconsin Avenue. There's another Le Peep story we ain't gonna tell. But anyway, so she said, "Would you support me to be the superintendent?" And I said, "Of course," because she was without question the person who should have been the superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools, without question. And you see, I'm trying to get points late. But what can I say, man? You know what I mean? But along the way, and Jeanette will have to speak to it, the word came to me that Debbie could not get the votes, in part because a couple men, white men, were not going to vote for her. One of them because she couldn't break up fights, which was totally insane. I know you think this is not true, but this is true. So I called Debbie up and said, hey, Debbie, you can't get the votes, and there's some people in the community who think I should go for it. And Debbie quit speaking to me on the spot. You know, it wasn't like, I'm going to quit speaking to you later. It was like on the spot. And I get it, because it was like a betrayal. You know what I mean? But I'm saying to her, it's really not, because you're not going to get the votes. In the meantime, she was out interviewing for other positions, but anyway. So there was a big hubbub, as you all know, about me being the superintendent. Reverend Ivy was involved because Farrell and them organized a couple ministers to say he shouldn't get the job. We had a group of ministers that organized and said that I should. They had to change the state law for me to be the superintendent, since I had never been a teacher or a principal. And so there's a Fuller bill floating around there where they changed the state law so that I could become the superintendent. So once, it happened, and even though the vote was 9-0, y'all know that was the public vote. You know what I'm saying? I know Jeanette know that I know that it wasn't 9-0. It was probably at best 5-4, and I never asked her who the people were. But Jeanette was kind of leery about me too. You know what I mean? So she, one of my closest friends, I'm getting all of this out. You know, so ain't nobody hiding. I ain't hiding, ain't nobody else hiding. So they did make me the superintendent, but the first meeting I came in with my strategy for change. Honest, Mike, they would not let me talk. And so I came out of the meeting, and I think Jeanette remembers this. I wrote an open letter to the Journal-Sentinel. And basically I said, I'm not taking this. And that led to a 3-hour knockdown, drag-out meeting. And then at the end of that meeting, some of them, including Jeanette, I think, came out wearing T-shirts that said "The Crusade to Save Our Children" with my picture on it. And so we had a great relationship for probably 2.5, almost 3 years, until I tried to bring Edison into Milwaukee. And then that led to the union running a slate against me. And once Leon Todd came in, I knew I was out. There was no way I was going to let this dude tell me to do anything, no time ever in my life. And so, because the newspapers asked me when I resigned, because if you all remember, I got the headline. You don't often get to write your own headline. I got to write my own headline. I refused to die death of 1,000 cuts. But people ask me off the record, why did you really resign? I said, man, let me explain something to you. I don't know if you all remember, but the way at board meetings, the superintendent would sit behind the board. And so Jeanette, as the chair of the board, would sit up high. And then the rest of them were on desks. So Leon Todd's back was to me. And so I told him, man, y'all going to have a picture of me leaping over the desks. So rather than to send the community through that, I should probably just resign.
So from that point, and we've only got about 5 minutes left, and I've not allowed you to ask any questions, but I'm going to finish strong here. And I'm going to ask you about the work you've been doing for the last 20 years of your life. You've called it sort of the next logical progression for social justice, and you've committed your life to this. But I wanted to ask you, and you have some reflections at the end of this book. You talk about the struggle, no progress. How much progress have we made?
Not a lot. I mean, it's hard to talk about. Kenneth Clark was in my office at Marquette Hall, and he was looking out the window. And, you know, he was in his 80s then, I think. And he was talking about how it was really wistful, you know. And I remember him telling me that he didn't think that his work had meant anything. And at this point in my life, I look out that same window and I have to force myself to understand that the glass is half full. That, in fact, at the point that I did certain things, it made a difference in people's lives. But when you look at the overall conditions of our people in our community today, it's hard to take, man. I mean, I was at the rally on Memorial Day for the young woman who ultimately died, who was shot in the head by these two dudes shooting on the playground. And I hadn't been over on 28th and Clark to really be over there. You know, I've driven and all of that. But the level of poverty in our city today is worse. And it's a deep structural problem. The type of violence that we're experiencing is different. But the thing that I see, and I see it with our young people at our school, is there are no boundaries anymore, Mike. There are no boundaries, man. And so the things that people are doing, like some of the young people will do stuff, and you look at them, and they look at you like, why are you looking at me? Because for them, it's normal. I mean, like we had a young dude, stole a computer a few years ago off the desk of a teacher. We found him because the kids tell. And you know what his argument to me was? She left it on her desk. And I was like, what? He's like, she left it on her desk, meaning if she left it on her desk, she wanted it to be stolen. And I know some of you, so there's a collective mindset that is very, very different. And I also think people don't value life in the same way. And but you know what, Mike? You got two choices in this world, man. You can get up and you know, well, a couple choices, 3. One is you can call in on the radio, which a lot of people in our community are good at. And all they do is on the radio. Ain't gonna bust a grape, ain't gonna do nothing. So you can be the radio callers, or you can wash your hands and try to move as far away from this as you can. And there are people whose whole thing is, let me get as far away from these people as I can. And if I don't never have to deal with them in life, I'm good. You know, like the Shelby Steele content of our character type approach. Race fatigue, you know, that those of us black people who done made it, we don't have no responsibility to these lowlifes who don't take advantage of America. Or you can be what I choose to be, and that is you get up every day to fight. And when you get up every day to fight, you have to accept the fact that the way that you choose to fight is not going to be universally admired and accepted. And the voucher movement is a prime example. One of my deepest friends in this room is Bob Lowe, and we totally disagree on voucher. Well, someday I move him, and someday he moves me, but we ain't never moved each other to the point that we agree. But because I know he cares deeply for kids, just like I do, we can remain friends. But we've got people in this community who've got in these silos, and I've helped dig the silos. And we have somehow got to get out of these silos, and we've got to figure out a way to work together to save our children. This is not about MPS. This is about MPS, charters, private schools. We got 3 sectors out here that can potentially educate kids. We are foolish not to devise a strategy to take advantage of all 3 of those sectors. And those of us who it just doesn't make sense to me, man. And what's happening is we're being forced out here to make false choices. It's just like people say, oh, you know what we're going to do now is we're going to concentrate on early childhood. Oh, because that's where you get the greatest bang for the buck. Excuse me. What about all of these children who are in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade? And hello, who do you think the parents are going to be of the early childhood kids? It's these kids in high schools that y'all don't want to work with. It's a false choice in America to say that we have to choose early childhood over high school. We have the resources in this country to do all of this. It is an issue of political will. And instead of us fighting together, we're arguing over stuff that we should have not been arguing over 20 years ago. Look, our children are in deep trouble in this community now. This community is in deep trouble. And we don't have the right to have those of us who could help not to be coming together to help. I'm going to just give you one last point. I know you didn't ask me this, but hey, I'm talking. So, I mean, let me give you and this really angers me, and I'm going to just get it out. I'm accused, like a headline in the Washington Post the other day after my book was, is he a warrior or a tool of billionaires? And the interesting thing about that heading is there are individuals in our community who are talking about corporatizing and so if MCA gets money from the Walton Family Foundation, which we do, and I'm so happy that we do, it's like a corporate this or that. When I was superintendent of the Milwaukee Public Schools, if I went out and got a grant from a major corporation in this city, all I heard was applause. Tell me how you can get corporate money for that. But if I get corporate money to help some kids up on 29th and Capitol, I'm a tool of the billionaires. I listen to these people talk this talk, and it gets down to like whose money is okay and whose money is not. Whose white people are okay and whose white people are not. I mean, I know y'all are not trying to hear this, but I'm telling you, but I just want y'all to know how I feel, because I don't care what y'all say about the corporate. No, I don't. Because my problem with the Walton Family Foundation is I ain't getting enough money. That's my issue. So I'm just saying.
So that's just some of what's in this book. It's just some of it.
It's in the book. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
There are, if you're interested, there are books outside available. I want to say again, thanks to everybody who filled this room today. Thanks to Dr. Fuller. It's always good to see him. And for those of you interested in education, we're going to have another good talk next week. Rob Rao, who runs Milwaukee College Prep, will be here to talk about what's happening in his schools. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time.